A very warm welcome to everybody. I am Meghna, and I extend my warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Samarpana. And I thank Akhilaka and all the guests this evening for doing this for us on behalf of our fundraiser. Before I hand it over to her to start the evening, I would just like to introduce our fundraiser. So we started this campaign on May 5th to procure oxygen cylinders for 5 of Chennai's government hospitals. This was a result of a conversation that volunteers of our team have been having with deans and doctors from Stanley Medical College and Rajiv Gandhi Government Hospital. And they highlighted that the need of the hour was to augment their oxygen supply. Uh, in any room, there are only 4 ports that can be connected to oxygen cylinders, and at a time, only 4 patients can use these equipment if they have to survive. So, which means that a lot of people who are waiting in the ambulances in the corridors end up losing their lives only because of the fact that we don't have sufficient infrastructure to cope with the number of people who are falling sick. So it is with great humility that we would like to tell you all that we have raised close to 51 lakhs in the last 8 days. And but even though that is a tremendous achievement, thanks to all of you, we still have close to 2.5 crores to go. So I request all of you to donate how much ever you can. And even if donations are not possible, do spread the word about this fundraiser, because amplifying the message will help us much more than we can imagine. Thank you once again, because Akhilaka reached out to us and she was so willing, and she said, I want to do something to help, to contribute and to help this cause. And we are so grateful, Akka, that you did this for us, because it is only with people like you that we are able to take this forward. So thank you so much. Again, I extend my warm welcome to all the esteemed panelists of this evening, and I hope you all have a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghna. I hope I can be heard loud and clear. Good evening, all. Thank you also to Gayatri Ravichandran, founder of Samarpana for Arts and Wellbeing, and the entire team for the commendable work you're doing for COVID relief in Chennai. All of us here are very glad to support this inspiring initiative at a time of great need. I'm Anjali Rajan, a writer and theatre actor, chair of the Division of Literature and the Arts at Kriya University, where I'm an associate professor of practice. It gives me great pleasure to set the stage for the poetry of 6 extraordinary writers: K. Srilata, Geeti Chandra, Anjali Rajan, Tishani Doshi, Gitanjali Kolonad, and Ananya Dasgupta. But why poetry now? Through the centuries, poets have stirred awakening, ignited protest, uttered prophecy, provided healing, and offered solace. At a time like this, when a pandemic ravages bodies, hearts, and minds, the individual and the collective, the experience of listening to poets speak and read from their work can, we hope, create a brief pause, a moment in which we gather together, rage together, grieve together, mourn together, experience pockets of laughter and love together, and somehow find the courage to go on. Let us begin. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first poet, K. Srilata. She's a professor of English at IIT Madras. She has numerous poetry collections to her name. The Unmistakable Presence of Absent Humans, I believe, is the most recent, and the title rings with especial poignancy today. Her novel, Table for Four, published by Penguin India, was longlisted in 2009 for the Man Asian Literary Prize. She is the editor of many anthologies, including the monumental Rapids of a Great River, the Penguin Book of Tamil Poetry, Short Fiction from South India, published by OUP, and the other half of the Coconut, Women Writing Self-Respect History, published by Zuban. Her multi-genre anthology titled This Kind of Child, The Disability Story, is forthcoming from Amazon Westland later this year. Srilata is both soft-spoken and powerful. I mean these as qualities in her writing. As a poet, fiction writer, and translator. Her poetry reminds us repeatedly of, and I quote, absences and how they are so present in our lives, end quote. Over to you, Srilata.
Thank you so much, Akila, for that very, very warm welcome. And thank you, Team Samarpana, and all the best for all your good work. Happy to join Anjali Rajan, Anjali Kolonad, Geeti Chandra, Tishani Doshi, and Ananya. Indeed, it is perhaps only through poetry and the arts that the world can heal, if at all. I'll begin with a poem about one of the things which I have missed most of all, right through the last year as well as this one. Graduating class. Come spring, I will lose them like buttons off an old blouse. Some will fly, I know, against the pull of home. Of the ones who stay, a few will get married right away. And fairy tale endings or not, a wedding there will be. And in the mail, an invite with a note. Dear ma'am, we would love to have you with us on our big day. Or words to that effect. And my eyes will grow moist, despite everything I know about weddings and marriages. Every spring after I lose them, there is that moment when I sit down in my office and look out the window at the peepal tree. Not a hint of yellow in all these years. I'll now read a poem I wrote earlier this week as a sort of ode, if you like, to our collective grief over the pandemic and all that it has taken from us, as also its tragic overlap with other pre-existing, almost unspeakable horrors, like Natasha Narwal's incarceration and her father Mahavir's recent death due to COVID, and what it all must mean for that young woman who got bail only after his death. This is for them and for all those like them sailing in that very precarious boat. Last rites for Natasha and Mahavir Narwal. We have entered a house that floats on water. This is where we must live from now. We write poems, we tweet for beds and oxygen. We call each other, the dread in our voices, a flutter of pigeons. A young girl has been in prison a whole year. Her father lies dying. I hope she's not in jail so long she doesn't see my face. We write poems uselessly. We fall mildly ill. We check our oxygen levels. We hope to live to tide over. We hope our children will live tide over. Whenever she comes back, she should find her room in good shape. We offer prayers to nameless gods, find lightness and solace in movies from the 70s. For a while, we are okay, we hold up. This house that floats on water is in a containment zone. But in the end, our grief escapes it, spills out, wave after wave. A tsunami of a poem towers over the sickness. This is the only way. Who said cleansing is easy? The tsunami of a poem is what we offer that young girl now on her way to perform the last rites, to look upon his face one last time. My next poem, Guten, was actually part of a larger series of poems on breath and was sparked off by a conversation I had with my mother-in-law, who used the Hindi word Guten or suffocation to describe how she was experiencing the lockdown. It was a word I had forgotten about, but it seemed like just the right word for what we were all going through. Guten. I feel a certain Guten, she said, using a Hindi word I have almost forgotten, but know in my bones, in my skin. Here, in the voices of friends I've been calling in turns, one of whom tells me she can't breathe. It is Guten I see in the eyes of the young who walk the empty streets. It is Guten in the playgrounds without a childhood, in a childhood without playgrounds. It's Guten in the souls of old women who stay home and stay home and stay home, dreaming of mangoes. This season, I'm told, even the mango trees are heavy with gluten. May I now request Ananya that you share screen, please? And yeah, once you share screen. So before Ananya actually shares screen, let me sort of, or as she's doing it. So this poem that I'll actually be inviting Ananya to read to us, and you'll see in a minute why. It was actually set to image by her as part of Project Held, a collaborative art and poetry project. And as you will see, it was written, it sort of gestures to the time just ahead of the pandemic finally becoming official in India, when I was out on a bird watching trip in the city's outskirts. I think it's only fitting that Ananya reads this poem given the time, love, effort, and care she poured into setting it to image. May I request you to read it, please?
Thank you so much for this, Srilata. Is the screen visible to everyone?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Our days would catch on the cruelest thorns. We placed our hopes on the first of the migratory birds. They had arrived, and so all was well and would be. Seasons would proceed as they were meant to. Girls would grow up, become women. We didn't know it then, that the birds would find their way home, that seasons would proceed as they were meant to. But our days would catch on the cruelest thorn.
Thank you so much. May I have the next slide, please?
Yes.
So this poem, Moons That Will Now Never Come to Light, speaks to the biggest sense of loss for me personally due to this pandemic, the feeling that my children had actually lost not just time, but also certain ways of being in this world. But there's a bit of a backstory to this poem because it was again part of the same, collaborative maze that was Project Held for us. So Anjali Rajan, who will also be reading today, responded to the poem that Ananya just read, Our Days, with another poem called Itadakimasu. And Ananya actually created a lovely photo collage in response. So this poem, also set to image by Ananya, was actually a response to both their work. So it's really like a set of, Russian, nested Russian dolls, if you like. Let me just read this. Hunger Moon, a new name for the same old. But soon we will run out of names, run out of new bonds, is the first thought I had upon waking to the faces of my sleeping children. Once newborn, named with deliberation. These past few weeks, they have felt to me like fetuses in formalin, preserved in pre-naming, moons that will now never come to light. May I request you to please move to the next slide? Yeah, so this is sort of a series of haibun called Roots in the Sky. Again, written for Project Held. And I must place on record here my thanks to Anjali Rajan for holding my hand through the writing of this, because haibun is a form that is really new to me. It's a Japanese form, a mix of prose followed by haiku. And I think I really enjoyed the emphasis on each syllable, each word, the slow nature of the writing of it. And once again, this too was in response to the pandemic, and I thought it's fitting that I read it. Next slide, please. Is there a slide before this, Ananya? Yeah. Yeah, the first time I hear of it. Like the wings of a trapped bird, the mild agitation in my friend's voice. But when she says the word, her voice, sibilant and soft, makes music of it. Corona, she says once and then again, with not a hint of the heaviness that is soon to befall us. The earth, vanishing in a rustle, a giant dust sheet. Having flown the nest. My son calls from the faraway town where his university is. He's coming home, he says. His bags are packed, haphazardly, I imagine, like an invasion of locusts. My flight, he begins. The school bell drowns out the voice I know so well, the voice that broke one summer many moons ago. A hatchling's call, in the peepal tree shade, always a mother. A hatchling's call, in the peepal tree shade, always a mother. Reminders. I fold the day's bad news into a black and white paper bird. COVID-19 tally, highest single day spike. The bird has lost its song, its spin. I tell myself I need to let it go, but my fingers refuse to unclasp. Hidden in the breath of friends, of strangers, this enemy I can't take my eyes off. Fearing death too often, washing hands. Fearing death too often, washing hands. The past is a door closed. I sit here thinking of the upside downness of things, like baobab trees. I think of all the ways there are or used to be of being young, of being middle-aged or old or happy or sad, of all the ways of holding peace. Where have they gone? A dog's dream, in the midday quiet, no entry. A dog's dream, in the midday quiet, no entry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Srilata. Those beautiful poems. We now come to Gayatri Chandra, currently research specialist with UNESCO's Gender Equality Studies and Training Program in Reykjavik, Iceland. Gayatri teaches at the University of Iceland and has been Associate Professor, Department of English at Stevens College, Delhi. She is the author of young adult fiction, the Book of Guardians trilogy, The Fang of Summoning in 2010, The Bones of Stars in 2013, and The Eye of the Archer 2020, all published by Hachette. Her mostly, I'm quoting her own writing here, her mostly sci-fi short stories and mostly sentimental poetry have been published in various amazing publications. Sadly, Gayatri says, nobody cares about her first nonfiction book, a groundbreaking academic work on violence, published by Macmillan in 2009, although 2021's Rutledge Handbooks of the Politics of the Me Too movement, Rutledge in 2021, has been getting attention. Gayatri writes poetry in April, paints on Tuesdays, and feels that people would do well to learn that a cello is not an oversized violin. She lives in Reykjavik with a husband, 2 kids, a dog, and a cat. Gayatри's poetry glints with a rich tapestry of literary and artistic illusions, simultaneously affording the quietude and experience of the ordinary. Over to you, Gayatri.
Thank you, Akhila. I thought about writing about peace, as you had suggested, making peace. And so what I have are a few poems that approach this from different ways, and I'll just very briefly introduce each one. So we live in times that I can only call apocalyptic, and peace is very hard won in these times, and sometimes I can't do anything else than simply express that feeling of apocalypse. So this is a poem I wrote sometime last year, and it's called How to Live in a World That Will End Tomorrow. You go to the sidewalk and you call out a name, any name that comes first to your mouth. You don't look north, you don't look south. It's all the same at the beginning of the end. Everyone's your friend. The guy frying eggs on a tela by the street, omelets people buy in a hurry to eat, the kid kicking cans on a fenced-off lawn, the women eyeing the flip-flops that you had on because you knew there wasn't going to be a dawn, that this heartbreaking sunset was just another con. Why would the threadbare family care? You're just passing through. They lived there, on the edge of paths that pass them by, blowing out clouds that blot out the sky. You should think twice if you're going to do this. Think of all the great stuff you're going to miss. The house you won't step into, the fields you'll never see, the trick of light that makes you think you're prettier than you used to be, but the time has come. You've had your walk, no leisure left to stop, take stock, The world will end tomorrow, and you should call out a name so that the monsters in the morning will know whom to claim. So I guess one of the things that made me write that poem was just to say, if we were to step out of our houses in which we're all locked down and go out and just be one amongst many people, who would those people be? What are we really giving up? And I think that to see oneself, to see ourselves as one amongst many is easier said than done, especially when events bring to mind the famous words, after such knowledge, what forgiveness? And so this next poem is for the migrant laborers who fell asleep on train tracks last year, and it's called Crimson Sleepers. Think how deep a sleep must be to not hear a train coming. How weary must be the bones to not feel the tremor in the steel rails. How mighty must be the weight of the kilometers walked in daylight. How heavy the limbs curled into themselves, how filled with longings, the small pillow of worldly belongings that cushion the head, paused in flight from the certain knowledge of death in the restful reaches of the night. Think of the poet who said, "It shall all be remembered." The washed away art, the slippers of women removed, the living soul of us, like these bodies, dismembered. Think how we daily forfeit the right to our grief, our surprise, our shame, our shock, our disbelief. Not one of them looks back. No slogans, no signs, no songs. The streets are theirs. The empty streets and the blood on the tracks. So I guess one of the ways that I think about peace is through poetry. And when I was about 12, my father gave me a poem that stayed with me through many, many struggles and battles. It was called Say Not the Struggle Not Availeth. I suspect many of us were given this in school. I first got this through my father, and he made me write it down, and I learned it up. And I think that in recent years, especially the last couple of years, for me, peace is knowing that someone somewhere is fighting on your behalf. And so this next one is called 101 Nights of the Falcon. And as you might know, the Urdu word for falcon is Shaheen. Where I come from, no gift comes in round numbers. No 10 rupees is ever given, it's always 11. A token of not finishing, not ending, the extra one a harbinger, an invitation, a wish, a granting of plenty, of more to come. Auspicious, we call it. A bringing to the fore of a promise for the years before the young. Where I come from, there is a tale of a clever woman who staved off death with 1,000 tales, each one saved for another night won, a full 1,001. Where I come from, legend has it that women sat vigil not one night or two, not a couple, a handful, a dozen, a few. Stories are told in hushed tones of a full 101. Every thrower of stones has heard it, every wielder of guns. Songs are sung of the women of the night, who spread their wings, became falcons, and took flight. So I find peace in writing. Of course, as many of us do, it's cathartic, it's therapeutic, it helps to articulate even the worst of our feelings. But I find much more than that, a sense, a piece of writing in a community. And as many of you listening might know, there is a community of writers that include all these wonderful women that are reading here today. And so I write one poem dedicated to them and to Ananya in particular every year. And this one is called My Last Poem As Ever is dedicated to those who save us from our lives of prose. We are warriors. Oh, we are those warriors who forge weapons from sorrow, from the things that haunt us, from our consolations, from each thought too tiny to share, from those fleeting visions too overwhelming to bear. Our wars are those that keep beauty awake, that inch of ourselves that remains defiant at the end of the day, and finds that one thing that is worth our while to say. So you, my fellow berserkers, give me madness for my armor, my bare skin of words, and your open hearts that are a battle cry. Our voices sing each other's songs for 30 days, never long enough to douse the thirst till April ends with May the 1st. So communities often have collective practices that offer solace and rejuvenation. And here in Iceland, where I live, going to their swimming pools, which have these hot pots that you can soak in, is a national pastime. And it's considered essential to their health of body and their peace of mind. And last year, when COVID shut down the pools, that was when we knew that there was a state of emergency, just a national state. People were like, oh my God, they shut down the pools. And I also just find it therapeutic to write doggerel sometimes. And so this poem is called What Do the Icelandic Do Without Their Pools? When things get tricky, the Icelandic aren't too picky. They stay indoors, line up at stores, do their chores, and mop their floors, report their symptoms if they start feeling peaky, work from home, and stay out of schools. But what do the Icelandic do without their pools? Rumor has it they can't live without them. They're essential for the locals to be able to keep their wits about them. Babies and mothers, athletes, newlywed brides and nuns, among others, philosophers, doctors, farmers, and fools. What do the Icelandic do without their pools? No soaking in the hot tubs, no water jet back rubs, no gossip with swimsuited friend, no kids splashing in the shallow end, no lobster-hued legs as you go from the 40 degrees hot pot to sit in the snow. No cloud of steam on shoulders bare, no dipping underwater to melt the icicles in your hair, no resolving your traumas by having a good soak. Pandemics are one thing, but is this a joke? Do they raise their arms to the skies and stare wildly about, smother a scream, stifle a shout? Do they refuse to eat, put down their tools? I feel their stress, their anguish and tension, and thus I seek an answer to this most pertinent question. How do they stay Viking strong and keep their cools? What do the Icelandic do without their pools? So when I posted this up last year sometime, it was amazing. The number of Icelandic people said, yes, this is so true. All I want is to be able to go to the pool again. So sometime last month, I hit a personal low and I found myself giving up in the face of such brutal realities. And I remember writing that when the iron hearts of crematoriums surrender, the poet needs must accept defeat. No mere broken heart melting with pity that still beats in my wordless body can compete. And that was when I went looking for courage. In the last few years, I've often gone looking for courage as a way of making my way towards peace. And I find the landscape here in Iceland inspiring in so many ways. So I'm going to share a photograph I took of one of my favorite places to go to nearby. It's a lake called Kleifarvatn. And this is what I found there. So let me just quickly do this. I'll find the picture and share it. There we go. There we are. And this is, it looks like it's black and white, but it's actually a color photograph. This is what it looked like. So here's what I found at Kleifarvatn. It's a poem that's called Courage. Some days I am the frozen lake, peaceful amidst strong hills. Some days I am the petulant sun, determined to go where I will. The other day I was the laden cloud, shattered by epiphany, my brooding grays split black and white, my single sharded to many. Today I am the jagged edges of shorelines uncertain and sharp, pulling away from towering pledges shadowed from the bright lit heart. I wonder if the lake I was runs still beneath the crust. If courage is not the water's edge, meeting what shores it must. Thank you all for listening. Akhila, back to you.
Thank you so much, Geeti.
I'm going to stop my, there we go.
Thank you. And now to our third poet, Anjali Rajan, teaches English and Japanese in Chennai. She has been writing haiku for 18 years and counting, and is drawn towards the deep and wide possibilities of the form. She writes haiku, senryu, haibun, tanka, and enjoys the collaborative writing of linked verse in the Japanese tradition. Her poems have appeared in online journals and print anthologies worldwide. Her interests include music, books, and Japanese calligraphy. She currently serves as editor of haiku at Cattails, the international journal of the United Haiku and Tanka Society. She is also an editor on the team of Cafe Haiku. Gitanjali is the oldest of souls, who is the youngest at heart. She will make you feel the smallest things in the biggest possible ways. Today, she will be reading some of the forms I outlined earlier and some free verse as well. Over to you, Gitanjali.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Akhila, for that introduction. I hope I'm audible. I'd like to start with a series on how we apprehend this pandemic and everything that's around us. This was written last year for the project HELD that Srilata had earlier talked about. And I must thank Srilata for all the help that she has given in shaping this series. So here goes. The series is called Sensorium. So it basically talks about all the senses and how I apprehended the lockdown last year. It's not the same as this year, but yes. A blueprint for good health. Bless grandma for her spider-veined handwritten remedies. Hot, spicy rasam, its asafoetida stinging my tongue. I remember an old uncle saying, it's all in the swish of the steel tumbler as you have to slurp it as it swirls. After each hospital visit, I relish some turmeric hope that this brown liquid will work. Second, pulse at dusk. Somehow comforting at sunset, these routine affirmations of life and breath, a slow, long hiss followed by a pause, and then a gentle exhale, repeated many times over. Soon, a long Om, and then the reverberations of the Brahmari. For now, it's playing in loop without shuffle, this reassuring, sticky music. 3, spicing it up. Twisting open the rolled edge screw caps, I sniff the various powders, coriander, turmeric, cumin, rattling off the names in my head. On the old kitchen shelf, I snuffle aniseed, mustard, peppercorn. My olfaction self-declares that I'm normal and keeping outside of the curve, flattened. 4, one-touch dial. This is for a friend of mine who's a nurse. She calls more often now to tell me about her day and night and dusk and dawn. Her hands drier with the use of alcohol and scrubbed clean multiple times. Face chaffed from the N95 mask. Weary of her own fingertips on gleaming surfaces that may not be what they seem. Weary of fractured memories that fit into a jagged crevice. 5, for your perusal. Mother peers at her phone screen to read reports and diagnosis of CA and its stages T1, 2, 3. While I look for a T to cross and an I to dot, searching for words, meanings, and closest approximations of translations, seeking comfort in another language. Meanwhile, my daughter scans for reason for possible futures. So that was Sensorium. In this lockdown, a particular concern for me has been, I deal a lot with very young people, and a particular concern has been not only COVID, but also the mental trauma and the mental health of these people. So everyone around us, in fact, not just young people, but more so the young population. And I thought this poem, which I'd written about 3 years ago, kind of resonated with me as of yesterday even. So please allow me to read it. It's called Uncharted Terrain. If I were to be a cartographer's muse, what color would I inspire for that deep, cavernous territory mapping my mind space? Would it be the color of luscious olives, shiny black with a zing? Or the heavy shade of grease, white with a rag from the mechanic's calloused hands? Would there be a slick of oil above the murky waters that gives off rainbow tints when the reluctant sun stops by to shed some of its weight? Perhaps you would go with indigo, royal blue and turquoise in the lucid hours before twilight envelops every rock, boulder, and space between thought streams. Then would I be measured, folded neatly and boxed away till years later, someone pulls me out, unfolds me and says, here lay a great, vast country. So amidst all of this, when Akila suggested that the theme would be making peace, the first thing I thought of was acceptance. And I always turn to this Japanese form called haibu, which, as Srilata had read earlier, is a kind of meditative poem for me, where there's a little bit of prose, and it's, it also has haiku interspersed. And amidst all this mental trauma and everything that's going on around us, which is very, very difficult, there is hope, right? There's a lot of hope in the actions of people, in the actions of volunteers, people and organizations like the one today who are fundraising for thousands of people who are struggling to breathe. Right? So I'd like to read this poem, and I hope you see some hope in it. It's called Stream of Consciousness. Intermittent rain. Intermittent rain, the pause and gush of worries. Will this mask be enough? Should I have worn a double mask? How come all these people don't have frowns? Why am I sweating? Why is there an air conditioner? Couldn't it just have been open windows? Gray walls, the sudden gurgle. Gray walls, the sudden gurgle from a baby. So I'd like to read a last poem. It's called The Singing Bowl. So I think many of you would have seen the Tibetan singing bowl. And yes, thanks, Ananya. So this poem was written last year during the pandemic, and for the project called HELD, which was curated by Goethe Institute. And during this project, Ananya was very kind to paint and set this poem to an image. And that's what you see on screen now. And it's not just one painting, it's a series of images, which I'd like to read. Only the words are mine, but the beautiful images are Ananya Dasgupta's. Right? So I'd like to read this. It's called The Singing Bowl. We recognize the object. It's the one from his travels to the hills one year, Despite the thick layers of dust and the patina, an aura surrounds the bowl. Mother washes it and rubs ash and brick powder on the outside. After a few hours, it's scrubbed clean. Slowly, a light sheen reveals itself. Swirls of burnt amber, swirls of burnt amber, a shattered sky. The bowl won't sing. Mother tries many times and gives up. When she hasn't succeeded, why would I? Yet I try. And I get a tinny grate in response. We place it on the mantle and forget about it. And then one day, the girl with impasto dreams in her head, Ragam Yamuna Kalyani in her heart, and embers of stars in her earlobes comes freshly bathed. She picks up the brass bowl, breathes from it, and turns the mallet in rhythmic circles. A soothing song of waves on the sand, dreamless sleep. A soothing song of waves on the sand, dreamless sleep. First rains, a green shoot from the split earth. A green shoot from the split earth. I'd like to dedicate the last poem, The Singing Bowl, to all the volunteers of Samarpana who are working so hard. There is hope in you and what you're doing. To everyone who's here, who have read and are going to read, and also to everyone who's spreading the word and actually keeping the green shoots alive. I hope you find some peace in the Tibetan bowl, or Ragam Yamuna Kalyani, or even perhaps the waves on the seashore. Thank you so much. Thanks, Akila. Thank you for having me here today, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjali Rajan. Now to Poet 4. Tishani Doshi publishes poetry, essays, and fiction. Her most recent books are the fiery, audacious volume of poetry, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award, and a novel, Small Days and Nights, shortlisted for the RSL Ondaatje Award, which seems fitting, for you only have to read her poems and social media posts to know how much Tishani obsesses about dogs, her dogs, all dogs. For 15 years, Tishani worked as a dancer with the Chandralekha group in Madras, touring nationally and internationally. She has written movingly of her experience of meeting Chandra and the creative transformations that resulted from that fateful encounter. A fourth full-length collection of poetry, A God at the Door, is forthcoming in 2021. Tishani's poems are marvels of image, sound, and movement. They have a vice-like grip on the present, even as they journey wide and far in space and time. Over to you, Tishani.
Thanks, Akila. It's so nice to be here with everybody. I'm going to read from A God at the Door. And the first poem I wrote after a trip to Haifa to visit some Palestinian friends whom I'm thinking about today, obviously. And there's a story here. I met a playwright who told me that he collects shards of houses that have been bulldozed by the Israeli army and troops, and that he hopes one day to build maybe a whole room or even a house with these shards, which I thought was a very beautiful poetic image. And the poem is called I Don't Want to Be Remembered by My Last Instagram Post. And it has to do with how we grieve and how we are trying to be political and how we find our place. I don't want to be remembered by my last Instagram post. If our ancestors really lived in dust, we could kneel and emancipate them from roots of tamarisk, and they'd tell us it's better to live as nomads, not to get too attached to the land or ourselves, not to jump from a window at our own party. Even the calmest of us will one day follow a thread of gold and find a way to hang from it instead of riding it steadily back into town. It is better to begin as bricklayer or cutter of stone before becoming a poet, because so much depends on who settles where and who tramples whom. History is a ruin from which we emerge. Whose temple, whose hill, whose house are we happily sitting in? How else to explain the country's new name, the tanks on the horizon? Strangers ask to be let in to reclaim their old treasures, but are confused by the redecoration. There were times we used to haul out our mad in circuses or Sunday tourists so we could measure the distance between them and us. Now we trawl through airless square boxes with calipers, leaving messages on virtual shrines, counting out followers. Beware the Pied Piper who promises a holy land. A man in Jaffa told me how he collects fragments of bulldozed houses. Somebody's heart, somebody's pewter knocker, somebody's father walking down a corridor in a dark suit and oversized glasses. One day he will make a whole thing from these shards, but until then, we feast in a graveyard. I'm trying to tell you something, but the helpline only works during business hours. We need new scribes for this ravage. Here is my distress signal. I arrive at meetings with an olive branch and a gun. I too want to lift everyone by the wrist and insist on how mysterious all this is, how precious. But perhaps I'm standing too far to the left or right because I can't find a filter to describe how talking about you is really talking about me. Even if we use hashtags and refuse to cry for stones that have been destroyed, even if we believe we are making a revolution from the platforms of our boxes by taking the knee and holding candlelight vigils, what are we really saying? And is it enough? Imagine the world as an aquarium, how some are always staring from behind the hard, polished glass, while others cling to crags surviving on breadcrumbs. Of course, there are beautiful colors and bright schools of fish. Despite what they say, there are still delicate cloisters of coral to get lost in. But as you descend, you begin to see creatures unchanged by time, blind giants with trapdoor mouths and leggy behemoths patrolling the sponge garden. It becomes difficult to breathe, and it is cold, but see, there are pinwheels ablaze and glowing tentacles that reach to embrace you. Language falls away, and everything is either light-giving or light-filled, filigree, rib, fringe, unfurling like flowers. The question is, how long can you go with your prayers? And what pictures will you take while you're there? This next poem is called Tree of Life. I wrote it last year after reading about a story about 7 men who walked home to their village during the great exodus from the cities to the villages. And there was no place in their houses for them to quarantine. So they were made to quarantine in a tree. And that made me think about Satyajit Ray's movie Patthar Panchali, and that's how images build in a poem in a strange way. So this began from that news headline: Bengal men self-quarantine on tree to keep others safe. Tree of life. It could be romantic to sleep in a tree with all the sounds of the forest around, insect cacophony, elephants in musk. I have always loved the word rut, a seasonal glut, the opposite of looking through a window to a never-ending view of wives washing dishes in the sink, Simone de Beauvoir's idea of the domestic abyss. But reader, she had silk curtains and chandeliers. She had multiple lovers and appointments with Sartre in the Jardin du Luxembourg. It is dangerous to romanticize anyone's life, especially low to purge the nobility of the poor. So let me not say how much I cried watching Satyajit Ray's Patar Panchali, especially the part with the kids running through the fields of Kash to watch the train of modernity pass. More poignant if you know the director's wife had to pawn her jewels for the film to be made. The goodness of some women, they almost levitate, like the girl in the film, Child of the Forest, how she picks thorns from her feet like stones from rice. And the crone, how I love the crone, how all this sadness builds like a raga to bring on rain, which the girl rushes into, of course, ripple of water lilies, sage of cranes, how all this joy leads to death. There are no spare rooms, is the point. In the film or real life, there are no spare rooms. So these men who've returned from the city are put in a tree to quarantine, a tree that strangles its host as it walks, munificent, shade-giving banyan that hurls down roots as trunks, in whose leaves God Krishna is domiciled. Krishna who talks good game about the temporality of the body while enjoying the bliss of so many pretty bodies, understood the material world as one huge inverted banyan. And as we are here in this reflection, why not enjoy the fruit? Why not leap from branch to branch like a hoopoe, which these men do, I suppose? Their good wives leave supplies at the base, rice and oil, cooking implements. It goes like this for days. The story of 7 men in a tree surviving a 21st century pandemic. Men who say they're pleased not to pass on any bad city virus. And because the news is so full of horrors and counterfeits, can we for once just succumb to the romance before us? Forget that the tree is moving, that one day its phantom limbs will tap against our door. Till then, can't we stand by our windows and stare at all the desolation and sweetness? Can't we adore the convoluted roots of our attachments, how they complete us? My God, how this living is a hymn. And this poem is called Hope is the Thing, inspired by Emily Dickinson. No dogs yet, but I do have poems with dogs in them. This has birds. Hope is the thing. These days I pay attention to birds. Bulbul gorging in the yellow trumpet bush, reminding me to drink my daily fill. Ring-necked parakeet flying past my office window like a gouache on loose leaf paper. If we knew our death days as we do our birthdays, would we celebrate them with garlands of wildflowers or rush past them in the corridor of each rolling year with a shiver? Would we go on periodic diets of martinis and wafers, trying to unhinge ourselves? I like to think of hope as an organism inside us, a cluster of molecules into which energy flows in and out, a hatchery whose inhabitants sometimes grow thin, or corpulence. As a girl, I wanted a man with a healthy jaw, like Jean Gabin or Dharmendra. I was thwarted by a teacher in Madras who sent me home to lower the hems of my skirts, shrieking, "Too short, too short." Hope died there that day, and once again in a motel overlooking a strip mall in Ohio. It's all right to be momentarily proud of being an unfashionable, shapeless martyr. It's okay to feel the loneliness crush into you like a boat pushing against a pier in a hurricane. You'll find your way back into the world by climbing into the wet fur of dark and measuring all the absences in the park. You turn and say to whoever your companions are, "Don't worry, dear, we are not far off." I'd like to grow up to be a woman with a crown of silver hair and a walled garden. But what I have instead are a pack of piebald dogs and some pots of mint and sage. What is this greed of wanting more, of baking 4 and 20 blackbirds in a pie and expecting them to sing, when you know that a 12-year-old girl who makes her living picking chilies has just died of exhaustion walking home? And as you learn her name, Jamlo, and are figuring out how to mourn her, someone else will say, "Look, the flamingos have returned to Bombay. Look how this carpet of pink brightens the day." It's the difficulty of reconciliation. This with that, Jack and his box, the continual threat of being startled. Maybe what you miss is what's simple, which isn't childhood, but that bird of prey holding the air with its claws. If you knew it would cost nothing to keep your wings open like an albatross, that you could go 10,000 miles without a single flap, that it has to be this way, this glissando between soaring and falling. You could pack up your indignation and move towards the phone booth in the sky. A god at the door is sitting on a giant buffalo, offering you a sip of wine to make the bitterness go away. Your final phone call is to the future. So fine, you say, but all going to be just fine. Thank you all. Thanks, Akla. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tishani. Our next poet, Gitanjali Kolonad, has too spent her life immersed in embodied practice, movement, and martial arts. She has been engaged in the practice of Bharatanatyam for close to 40 years, performing in major cities in Europe, America, and India. Gitanjali's short story collection, Sleeping with Movie Stars, published by Penguin, was longlisted for the Franco Corner Short Story Award. Her first novel, Girl Made of Gold, was shortlisted for the Tata Live Novel of the Year 2020. She has written on Indian dance for well-known Indian publications. Impact, the organization she co-founded, teaches and promotes Indian martial art forms in Toronto. She was also a professor at Shivnada University, developing their performing arts program. Currently, Gitanjali is working on her second novel, set within the world of early Tamil cinema. Gitanjali's poetry is marked by a deft and playful use of form that underscores and counterpoints depth of idea and feeling. Over to you, Gitanjali.
Thank you. Thank you, Akila. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this event. And thank you. Your fundraising organization is fabulous because it makes it very easy to donate. I would like to say that right off the start. Sometimes these organizations are quite difficult, but this was very simple. I don't have a lot of poems to choose from, and so I haven't stuck to the theme or have looked only at what I've written during COVID. So please understand that. As a poet, sometimes I find that what I'm writing about is the act of writing poetry and trying to figure out that all the time. And so the first poem is called Meter. Meter. Valmiki, it is said, found his meter first from a curse. Only then the story flowed. Blood, exile, abduction, expeditions, annihilation, reconciliation, demisexuality, hyper-emotionality. For Paul McCartney too, first the tune, scrambled eggs standing in for yesterday. He'd been sitting by the river when the hunter killed the Saris crane, waiting, waiting, waiting. A road sign framing iams, turn left and left again, forewarns that going straight won't get me where I'm going. And as a dancer, the body is always front of mind. And I'm always thinking about what this is that we live in. Bones. The bones in the body have names. Latin obscures their simple meanings. Clavicle, a key. Tibia, a flute. Scaphoid, like a boat. Femur, thigh. Ilium, flank. Except for one. Os innominata, left and right. The bone named, bone without a name. That's the paradox we're sitting on. And I have to say that I never would have started writing poetry except for Ananya Dasgupta. She's responsible for a lot of mischief, I have to say. And one of the things that she taught me when she was trying to get me into writing poetry was that you could always rely on form to help you. And this poem is a terza rima, which is a linked tercets with an A, B, A, B, C, B kind of rhyme scheme. And it expresses an argument I always used to have with a friend of mine who's a poet. And he always used to complain about how bad poets get treated in society. And then I'd say how badly dancers get treated in society. And we'd argue about who had it worse. And so this terza rima for dance. Why dance when dance, as every dancer knows, won't get you on the news or bring you fame? That goes to those who pose without their clothes. Though dance is often naked, there is no shame in bodies. Yes, there's money to be had dancing on a lap or pole, but no acclaim. The choice, be underpaid or underclad. Unlike a book or song that multiplies 1,000,000 times, the math of dance is bad. While when a painter dies, prices rise, the dead can't dance. It's not the grave, but gravity that dance defies. Maybe poets too must scrimp and save, since no one pays to see a poet nude. But neither do they have their lines engraved with care, erased by time as dancers do. Flesh and bone decay, bodies age so fast, when every arabesque is made anew. Dance is in the present, and that's already past, ephemeral, no matter how sublime. So poets shouldn't whine, their words will last. But keep in mind, the God who sets the beat of time, he dances, he doesn't make up rhymes. And then when you're writing poetry, death, I don't know why, death always seems to come to mind. And the death of my mother in the year when I reached the age of her death, inspired me to write a poem about her. Dukkha. The first time I encountered sorrow, I stood on one side of a locked door and listened to my mother's sobbing. Till then, I'd taken only my own pain seriously, a scraped knee or some sweet I couldn't have. Now, like that woman sent for mustard seeds by the Buddha, I felt the shell of self crack and that truth seep in. I'd come back empty-handed. My mother made her meals from bitter greens, weeds dug from the garden in the spring, dandelion and burdock root, like women once called witches. She treated like with like. So she'd lost all bitterness by the time I knew her best. When, no more a child, I became the cause of her anxiety. I know why, she said, the Buddha left his kid behind. You're not to blame. Attachment causes pain. My mother took the gold chain she always wore, put it round my neck, didn't pull me back when I rushed headlong into the world. I would have sold my soul more than once had anyone offered to buy it. Cold days and lonely nights, my mother prayed that Buddhist prayer, may you be safe from harm, you and all beings. My mother wrote me letters no matter where I went. When that chain was snatched from round my neck, I wrote, the gold you gave me is gone. She replied, oh, my darling, let it go. Who cares? Things of value can't be stolen. The moon reflected in a cup is not lost when the water spills, the Buddha said. I'm older now than she was when she died. She still gives light. And when I can't find something to write, then I walk, and that always helps. It's never failed. Trinity Bellwoods Park on a sunny day in spring. When I walk, the poem writes itself in branches dipped in buds across the sky, the exclamation of other people's tulips, the apostrophe of skirts lifted by the breeze, young couples within the parentheses of their private smiles, simile of parent and child, carrying, being carried, pushing, being pushed on the swing, ellipses of shirtless men showing their pale backs to the sun, N dash and M dash, rollerblade and bicycle, comma and period of old men and old women walking their small, ugly dogs, the hieroglyphs of bark on old trees, undeciphered signature of their shadows. The poem writes and makes itself mine. Thank you. And thank you, Akila, so much. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gitanjali. Our final poet for the evening is Ananya Dasgupta, who moved to Chennai in January 2019 to work at Kriya University, so she's my colleague. She's the director of the Center for Writing and Pedagogy. She's a scholar of early modern literature, a photographer, painter, and poet. For several years now, she's been running a blog called The Daily Riyaz, where poets come together to write a poem a day for the month of April. Out of the harvest of many Aprils came her book of poems, Between Shore Places. She's currently working on her second collection titled The Fullness of Brief Time. And as her poems and social media posts reveal, Ananya is madly in love with the sea, the Bay of Bengal in particular. Her poetry is whimsical, wistful, funny, and achingly sad by turns. Over to you, Ananya.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Akhila. To begin today's reading, I will actually go back to the poem that Shilata had me read out, Our Days. And it's interesting that that poem came out of a bird watching trip that that I took with Shilata and her family. Her family is into bird watching. And this year in January, we went for another bird watching trip. In fact, that was the only other bird watching trip I've been with them. And of course, a year on, we didn't know what our April and May were going to be like. So this poem is called Birds on the Edge of a City. We went to watch birds in the backwaters of Chennai, leftover ocean in brackish lakes, where the slowly creeping water hyacinth is squeezing out its living air. Some reeds of grass hold on to residues of smoke from exhausts of cars on the highway, holding on to what ought to have been let go, held on by what has nowhere else to go. But even in this, we find a small paradise. On an island of mud and rocks, an acacia tree, on its branches, egrets and cormorants, dipping pintails swimming close by as a purple heron swoops in, and overhead, pelicans fly. Driving back, we stop at the Kuvam River, not speaking of effluents, drudging bottoms, not holding grudges, only one dead fish and a sunset painted in storks. What the city refuses clings to our clothes and smell. Borne by the force of conviction, the birds flee higher and higher. At home, we remake them. The rapid flapping of goose wings in wooden clappers and the wound up cuckoo bird on a short spring. I would now like to share my screen. And as I'm doing that, I'd like to acknowledge that over the last few months, actually more than that, almost over a year, thanks to Gitanjali Rajan, I got introduced to writing haiku and haibun, and Geeta and Shilata have both read haibun before. I also got introduced to the idea of a haiga, Gitanjali, correct me if I'm wrong, where the haiku is written to an image. And as Akhila said, I'm madly in love with the sea. So I'm sharing with you a bunch of haiga that I wrote. So haiku written to images of seashells that I also drew with. So here goes. On a clamshell, mountains fished from the sea. On a clamshell, mountains fished from the sea. Hooked to the moon shell, its eclipse. Hooked to the moon shell, its eclipse. Sorry. In the shadow of a purple razor clam, a possibility. In the shadow of a purple razor clam, a possibility. Pleated in a scallop skirt, folding waves. Pleated in a scallop skirt, folding waves. Glimpse of a green mussel, parting sand. Glimpse of a green mussel, parting sand. Of course, the beaches in Chennai are now officially closed and I can't be going to them. So I am doing with what is available, which is flowers that are blossoming at this time in my apartment complex. So here's an oleander for you. Gifts of spring, white oleanders. Achoo! Gifts of spring, white oleanders. Achoo! A touch of turmeric easing up the throat. A touch of turmeric easing up the throat. In a full-throated choir, one whistler, champak blossoms. In a full-throated choir, one whistler, champak blossoms. On the frangipani, cold sweat of the moon. On the frangipani, cold sweat of the moon. Gitanjali and Shilata read Haibun already. So Haibun combine prose and haiku. I also have images here. So I'll read a couple of really short haibun. This is called Sickness in Trees. Maybe good and evil is a way to describe the hardness of hearts to suffering that does not feel like one's own. Between the axe and the blight, a nesting fowl. Between the axe and the blight, a nesting fowl. Sorry, this one is called Point of Crossing. Before the lockdown in year 2019, I fulfilled an item out of my bucket list of visiting the Masai Mara. And the image of the wildebeest crossing the Mara River came back to me very powerfully in a very different context this year as I wrote the following haibun. A mahant at the Kumbh Mela in a TV interview. We are all going to die sooner or later. That's no reason to stop doing what we are meant to do while alive. The bathing in the Ganges will continue as planned. Those who get sick with the virus will get treated or ascend to heaven for having taken the holy dip. Lakhs of maskless pilgrims continue to gather in close proximity in Haridwar. The old Mara River, wildebeest jump in, sound of death. The old Mara River, wildebeest jump in, sound of death. God is in charge at the Kumbh and the government everywhere else. A cop in Delhi told my friend who was pulled over for driving maskless while alone in the car and had offered Kumbh as irony. The cop didn't ticket the violation. In endless savanna grasslands, an occasional acacia tree. In endless savanna grasslands, an occasional acacia tree. Visit my shore before this lunatic world ends, I told two different friends today. Visit my shore before this lunatic world ends, I told two different friends today. Grazing on sunsets, giraffes. Grazing on sunsets, giraffes. What can I do to help? As if in a movie script, unfolding shot by shot are scenarios, different ways in which disaster comes unannounced. What if this, then what? What if that, then when? What if it is not when, but how? In the hands of a laughing child, roulette. In the hands of a laughing child, roulette. Yanked back to being a spectator, gadget screens. Yanked back to being a spectator, gadget screens. The new variants seem to be escaping detection. This is called the newsfeed. The new variants seem to be escaping detection, I said. The existing vaccines might not work, to which he said, let's believe they will. New leaf to a caterpillar's open mouth. New leaf to a caterpillar's open mouth. Spiral bind. If only one didn't care at all. Perforation for easy detachment, pores of the skin. Perforation for easy detachment, pores of the skin. I'll stop sharing the screen to read out my last poem. And as I read my concluding poem, you might catch some resonances to something quite well known, actually. I'd be happy to hear what you think. This is a villanelle, like the poem that it's speaking to. This is called Going Gently into the Good Night. When I go into the good night, alone with only myself to bring, I hope to go in peace, in light. Injustice, hurt, rightful rage, slight, calmed, ungrasped, nothing to claim when I go into the good night. Not in strength, nor even might, not in the slowed lees of aging. I hope to go in peace, in light. Give away, be unburdened, light, feel no lack of love or loss of wing when I go into the good night. Sound, smell, touch, taste, sight, gently eased, left to crave nothing. I hope to go in peace, in light. Freed of what may or what might, will I keep in heartful reckoning? When I go into the good night, I hope to go in peace, in light. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Samarpana, for giving us this opportunity to be a part of the fundraising. Over to you, Akhila.
Thank you, Ananya. Thank you, Samarpana, for Arts and Wellbeing, for welcoming us into your fold, and Arimba Sriram for coordinating this event. Thank you, audience, for listening. Those of you who can, please donate what you can to the Samarpana for Arts and Wellbeing fundraiser to get oxygen to COVID-19 patients in Chennai government hospitals. You can find details on their Facebook and Instagram pages. Every bit counts, and it is for this urgent cause that these brilliant poets have given so generously of their time and creativity today. Dear poets, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving us the gift of your voices and words. Before we close for the night, I must tell you that the title for this reading, Facets of the Forming Crystal, comes from another beloved poem, Denise Levertov's Making Peace, which ends thus. Peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war, might pulse then, stanza by stanza, into the world. Each act of living one of its words, each word a vibration of light, facets of the forming crystal. Levertov was writing a poem in America about making peace in the wake of the horrors of the Vietnam War. Now, as the pandemic rages here in India, there is no overt war, though we keep using its language. There are no obvious sides, though we keep trying to take them. But our poets, Srilata, Geeti, Gitanjali, Tishani, Gitanjali, Ananya, who are truly facets of the forming crystal, show us the way, bringing the peace and healing we need into the world. Everybody stay safe, be well, make room in your lives for poetry. It will help you face whatever lies ahead. Thank you all.
And thank you so much, Akhila, for knitting us all together and really making this possible, organizing all of it. Deep, deep gratitude to you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Akhila.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you, Akhila.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Akhilaka, and all the panelists. It was a great evening. I don't want to try to put it into words. Thank you so much. I hope you all had a good time. And